And we are live January 20th, Inauguration Day here in the United States of America. Ryan Ray alongside Chris Fenton. Chris, we took a few days off, rested up, ready to go, I hope.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I was in Arizona for a lacrosse tournament over the weekend with my son. We had a nice little run, 5-1, not too bad. Played a lot of the teams around the country. It was good to see kids doing kids stuff, even in the middle of all this COVID chaos. So that was uplifting. And then obviously we're coming into a week right now where there's a significant change in power here in the United States of America. And so far, it seems like we're on a smooth and calm and steady transition of power this week. Hopefully that continues. Obviously, this is something where we know half the country or almost half of the country is not super excited about this day today, but I'd like to believe cooler heads will prevail and we can start to move forward in some sort of new directive and new beginning in regards to a lot of the things that, quite frankly, need to get fixed in this country.
Okay, so we aren't the only ones who realize it's Inauguration Day. We saw, I think Bill Bishop retweeted. I saw you retweeted, and so I did as well. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China just happened to announce today that foreign minister spokesperson announced sanctions on Pompeo and others. It says there's 28 officially they're sanctioned. The list that I see here doesn't have 28, so I don't know if that list is to come or if there's somewhere down in the transmittal it's listed. But big names like Pompeo, Navarro. And then also you have folks like Bolton and Bannon who aren't even a part of the administration, and they are basically barred from China for the time being. Bill Bishop, I think, said something to the effect, and I don't want to misquote him, but something to the effect of, if you thought that maybe the Biden administration was going to change their relationship immediately, China is kind of signaling that they're not interested in that today.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a total surprise that they were going to somehow try to retaliate in some ways against some of the people that have been really difficult on China from our administration and from the surrounding branches of our government. To do it on Inauguration Day is a little outlandish, I would say. And then on top of it, to look at what these sanctions entail, which, by the way, the one country, two systems policy doesn't really seem to be in effect because these people are banned from not only showing up on mainland China, but also Hong Kong and Macau. I thought that was sort of an interesting ad. And it's a whole laundry list, as you said, from Navarro to Robert O'Brien, David Stilwell, Matthew Pottinger, Alex Azar, you name it. It's a big list. And like you said earlier, I don't see the former President Trump on the list, which is sort of an interesting one. But this is really going to set a tenor for the next 4 years in a way that I'm not exactly sure we expected, especially on Inauguration Day.
Yeah, before we go any further, this show is live on Twitter, Periscope, at Ryan Ray Sr. is my handle. You can find me there. And obviously we include at the Dragon Feeder, which is Chris's handle. Also, you can find the show on Spotify, iTunes, anywhere good podcasts are found. If for some reason your platform doesn't have it, let us know. We'll get it on there. So if you missed the live show or portions of it, be sure to check the podcast out and always share the show. Sharing is caring, right, Chris? That's how it goes. Sharing is caring. Okay, so you mentioned the names that are on there and on there. To me, so Trump's not on there. We'll maybe come back to that. But to me, this is kind of a simple play from China. So they can list these 28 names. Probably none of those names will be in the Biden administration. And so they can get an easy win here. Is Biden going to spend a lot of time trying to get Mike Pompeo or Bannon back into China? I don't think so. So it kind of seems like an easy W for the Chinese side to take. And they probably don't give anything in return because I can't imagine Biden is going to spend his time trying to get these names revoked anytime soon. Maybe down the line, there'll be some part of some deal. But it's an easy W for China, it seems like to me.
Yeah, I honestly don't see any sort of priority in regards to getting any of the people on that list, unsanctioned by China. I think there's a lot bigger fish to fry when it comes to China. But I will say one of the things that I think we should talk about today is how Biden is going to, proceed with that U.S.-China relationship moving forward, particularly in the first 100 days. I'm actually feeling cautiously optimistic about some of the people that I'm seeing him put in very influential spots in regards to the engagement of China from the United States. A lot of these people I didn't really know a lot about prior, so I'm reading up on them quite a bit. I mean, we talked about the National Security Council and Kurt Campbell's appointment. I also saw that he brought on a woman named Laura Rosenberg, who I'm doing more diligence on, but she seems to be quite hawkish towards China. As we talked about or suspected on the last podcast, Eli Ratner was going to be brought in. We didn't know what position, but it looks like he's an advisor to the Pentagon on China. So he'll be working obviously with Lloyd Austin, who I think some people were a little concerned maybe didn't know China all that well, or might have been a little too dovish. So that's a good appointment. I actually really liked the fact that our Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen came out the other day and talked about her stance on China and how hawkish she intends to be in regards to proceeding with that dynamic bilaterally. So I'm feeling pretty good about how the table is getting set. Obviously, we don't have a U.S. ambassador to China set up yet, and there's a lot of other positions that need to be filled. But so far, so good. So, I thought one of the things we might want to talk about today is maybe some of our wish list of what we'd like to see happen over the next 100 days in regards to China that lays the groundwork for the next 4 years.
Yeah, so I was listening to a podcast, and I'll try to pull it up while we're talking here in a second to reference it. But it was, the China Power podcast, China Power. And so it was an episode from November or December of last year. And they brought on, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he's talking about the Uyghur issue. And he said something that was stunning to me. He said that the EU, the countries of the EU, are having a hard time, and I don't want to misquote him, but basically grappling with the reality of what's going on with the Uyghurs, that they don't really necessarily buy into it. Or they're not as prone to buy into it. And I think maybe he's being far more generous than I would be, but I would say that's day one. Put pressure on the EU to really come out and to acknowledge what's going on with the Uyghurs. Pompeo called it a genocide, I think yesterday, day before yesterday. I think that's the first thing in the first 100 days, because once everyone starts to acknowledge what's going on with the Uyghurs, then you really have a hard time denying it or doing deals with China in light of that. But if you kind of push that to the side, then you can say, well, the Uyghurs are bad, this, that, other. But I think once you take a stance on what's going on with the Uyghurs, then you have to deal with some of these other issues. And so if you're going to do a trade deal, it's like, well, okay, well, what are you doing with the Uyghurs? That question always comes up. So I think that is the easiest play. There's no harm, no foul. It's a human rights issue, something that should be done. That's where I would like for the Biden administration to stop. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I'm with you too. I mean, there's a lot of obviously human rights issues in China that need to get addressed, but is that really something we can address in the first 100 days? I actually would back up even farther and essentially implement a policy where the United States government will back any individual citizen or corporation or government leader in regards to their freedom of speech rights to voice their concerns about what's going on with the Uyghurs and the Xinjiang atrocities. That's something we haven't even been able to do, right? I mean, whether Daryl Morey wants to talk about the Uyghurs, whether Nike now wants to come out and say, hey, look, we're a proponent for all kinds of social justice and human rights issues. We now want to speak up about this area of China and our big concern. Whether the NBA wants to, whether Disney, which got into hot water over the Mulan controversy and shooting in part of that movie in that province. That to me is a more baby step that we might be able to formulate an idea and possibly implement a strategy that protects people to be able to speak about this problem. Because if we can't speak about it on an individual citizen basis, on an individual company basis, on an individual industry basis, and then even on a leadership basis, then we can't even talk about trying to address what you're saying in regards to trying to stop the atrocities, right? So how do we do that? What's the leverage we have? The government here can easily say, hey, look, we support free speech rights here on this soil if our companies, our individual executives want to speak up about this. And if there is retaliation against those individuals, those companies, those industries, then us as a country is going to back them until that retaliation is extinguished, right? So, and what is that leverage? What is that country sort of, power play that allows the retaliation to go into retreat. I mean, one thing that we have coming up very shortly, and we saw Xi Jinping walking some of the facilities the other day, is the Beijing Olympics. That's a big one we can hold over their head. And there's a big face issue involved with China not being able to get every nation to participate in those.
Okay, so I think we might be saying the same things. To be clear, you're what I'm saying is, if it's true that the EU is reluctant to acknowledge the Uyghur atrocity, Biden should call upon NATO and our allies to formally talk about it, just because that talking about it puts the pressure on. It also works on some of the things that you're talking about, which is these multinational companies who are afraid to do it. It kind of garners that support. So I'm fine with your option. I'm fine with the EU option. I'm not talking about getting trade deals done using this. I'm saying that you're going to have this in the background, and the sooner we can talk about it, the sooner we put pressure on China. So whether it's for the private industry in the US or the EU, I'm fine. We need more people talking about it, because that's the one thing the CCP doesn't want. They don't want you talking about it. They will be concerned if nations start saying, hey, this Uyghur stuff got to stop. Well, the Olympics, they're concerned about hosting them, because who's going to say what when you come to their country? And so I think that's kind of that momentum that I'm looking for from the Biden administration, whether that's domestically or abroad. And you're right. You have to encourage companies in the U.S. That if you're going to speak about issues, you have to do this. And I wrote a piece, I guess last week, about how we jumped the shark with China. We kind of just, it's kind of gotten silly now, and we need to bring it back to this, as you say, keep it simple, stupid, the common sense stuff, the simple stuff, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of pressure that can be put on the Chinese by just talking about the things that they don't want. And I think most Americans don't really understand the power of that, because we live in a free speech society, and in China they don't. So the more people talk about the Uyghurs or whatever it is, that your particular issue with China might be, that's the more power you have to leverage against the Chinese. And you don't have to be belligerent, be rude. Just talking about it is what they don't want.
No, I think you're 100% right. And one of the things that we need to do too, and the Biden administration needs to be a leader in this, is really bring to light for the majority of our populace a lot of these issues that China is involved with, that are negative attributes towards the health and welfare of the United States overall, and for a majority of Americans, right? If you look at what Donald Trump did, he did pull the fire alarm. He did create an awareness that, whoa, China might not be this amazing ally, this globalist sort of reckless abandonment form of capitalism that we've engaged with China might not be in the best interests of the majority of Americans. He sounded that alarm. Now, what he did after that sort of left it out there in the ether. I think some people are confused about it. The policies were never sort of implemented. I still don't know what the heck is going on with TikTok, wherever that went. Like, a lot of this stuff just sort of evaporated into the ether and out of the news cycle. And it's sort of amazing how we allow that kind of stuff to happen. But, sounding the alarm has occurred, but now we need to follow up on that alarm and make sure people understand the importance of how China influences us and all the negative parts of that. But also reiterate, and this is something obviously Biden's going to be better at than Trump, is the fact that there is a hard disengagement with China that is almost impossible to do. We are very entangled, and there's a lot of positives that can come out of the relationship if we address a lot of the negatives first. I mean, we have helped them build this massive economy. There's no reason why we can't do what Europe did with America back in the early 1800s and say enough is enough. Now we want to make money off of what we helped you build off of our backs and stealing our IP and our technology and all that kind of stuff. And we talked about that before. So we need to educate. We need to make sure the populace is behind this directive, because they're the ones that ultimately are going to put the pressure on the companies to do the right things, the C-suite executives to do the right things, shareholders, investors to do the right things, and our leaders to do the right things. So it all goes back to being able to talk about it. And that is going to be key. And that's been one of the biggest stumbling blocks we've had up until now, because everybody is scared to talk. I mean, I just did a segment with CBS News the other day, and they're trying to find others to talk about sort of the Hollywood China engagement. And it's hard for them to find others that are willing to speak up about it. And, I'll try to lead them to a couple of the people that I know are willing to do it, but it's few and far between. And that's just one industry that is really reluctant to speak openly about the issues that are at hand that need to get addressed.
The next thing I hope that the Biden administration does, we talked about this, I guess last week it was now, we had 50 cases or whatever it was. They shut down 22 million people. We have to pull back the curtain on the numbers from China, whether it's COVID numbers, GDP growth, whatever it is. We have to start talking about it in context of how the numbers aren't trustworthy, and American policy cannot react to whatever China numbers are, because they're not trustworthy. And so we want them to be honest. We want them to be forthright. And, if you want to criticize our government for fudging the numbers here and there, I've got plenty of talking points on that too. But we need to encourage the Chinese to be honest with their numbers, or just not respond to how they act, because we've seen since China shut down those 20 million people outside of Beijing, kind of talks about, well, China's doing this, maybe we should. It's like, okay, guys, we got to pump the brakes. They lie about the numbers, and people, you have to be reminded of that, because you forget. It's easy to forget. I forget. You forget. We all forget. And so I think that would be a nice, easy approach. Is that, listen, again, you don't have to be belligerent, not be rude. Just, they falsify their numbers. So why should we respond in kind when they're doing stuff like this? So what do you think about that kind of messaging?
Well, I mean, yes. Well, first of all, they're a strategic competitor. If anything, they're the other lacrosse team that my son is playing. So yes, there's might be some camaraderie and shaking hands and certain amicable sort of gestures, but both teams want to kick the crap out of each other. So if you look at, for instance, the numbers with COVID, once again, I'll say, I don't know what's in it for China to help us at all. Like, I just don't know. Like, if anything, this has been the greatest boon for China in the last 10 years in regards to getting to mitigating the lead that the U.S. had as far as economics, military might, et cetera, et cetera. And they have gained a lot on us, and they continue to gain on us as we muddle through this COVID crisis ourselves. So I would say in the first 100 days, one of the things we really need to focus on is getting rid of this COVID situation that's happening here in the U.S. that is really sidelining a lot of proactive efforts we can do in regards to the bilateral relationship. And let's go back and retrace the fact of where this COVID crisis even came from. That was China. So that is definitely a China initiative that we got to address as a nation first. But those numbers with COVID, I don't see China ever helping us there. Now, another place where I do think we can address a numbers situation is these publicly traded companies. And I brought up Janet Yellen. Janet Yellen, who's our Treasury Secretary, needs to work closely with the SEC to start determining how we're going to proceed, if we're going to proceed with any of these Chinese public companies getting access to our U.S. markets. It's ridiculous, I think, that we allow them to do that, mainly because they simply aren't on the same accounting standards as any of the companies that we're normally trading here in the United States of America. And even if they do put forward some sort of standard of accounting through whatever third-party accounting firm that they do the numbers through, those accounting firms tend to be branded name entities of, say, ones that we know of well here in the United States of America that are actually owned and operated in China. So they might work under those accounting firm names, but they definitely don't apply the same accounting standards to any of those companies. So why are we allowing mom and pop and institutional investors and pension funds and everybody else access to invest in these companies when, by the way, in a single day, they can take down a CEO just because he says something wrong, as we saw with Jack Ma and Alibaba, who Jack is no longer technically running that company, but he's a big figurehead. Or we can see them just shut down a potential IPO that sophisticated investors happen to be in, like Ant Financial. Or it might just simply see a complete obliteration of a stock price of a coffee company that was completely fabricating their numbers unbeknownst to any innocent investors here in the United States of America. It's ridiculous, and it's something we got to address, and it goes right back into your numbers thing.
So stocks were where I was going next. We need clarity on what is insider trading, how does it work, and it's just not a China problem. It's any foreign owned entity. Can they be listed on our stock exchange? How does that work? Those are now, obviously, I'm going to be a little bit different on how we should handle it than you, but we need clarity. We need the Biden administration, the SEC, to come out and say, this is how it should be. We're going to let them do it. Or we're not going to let them do it. We're going to let them do it with a warning. This company, I would be okay with that. It's a big warning because that would affect the stock price on some level. People understand the risk, the Robin Hood traders, if you will. So yeah, I do think we need clarification there. And as you mentioned, Jack Ma, let's talk about that real quick. He emerged, we think, for I think a 50-second video. Chris, are you convinced that Jack Ma's not out of the woods, but was this proof of life for you?
I mean, I think we talked about the fact that I don't think you or I or most experts thought he was dead or something like that. I don't think he was ever going to be a disappeared forever type of character. If anything, I always thought he would be a Fan Bingbing type of situation where a lesson would be taught against him. He would be reprogrammed or whatever over the course of a year, and then he would pop up essentially chattering the party line consistently over and over again until death do us part. It seems like his progression to that Fan Bingbing stage has occurred only over the course of, say, 3 months, although we haven't really seen him officially out in public yet, like we did with Fan Bingbing. That was sort of an interesting short video. There wasn't much to it. It was pretty stilted as far as what he was talking about. I'm not sure where that leads, other than maybe they were just trying to say, hey, look, he's alive. It's interesting how I don't know if there was a lot of proof that when that was done and all that kind of stuff. So it's a little scattered as far as authenticity and sort of fact checking, but regardless, I don't think any of us thought he was dead and he was going to disappear forever. But it will be interesting to see when he actually comes back out in the public in a more full-time kind of way. What are the party narratives he's talking about? What is his big position on things? And how does he act and move forward under the directive or the forced education of the CCP?
Yeah. So go back to our initial question, the first 100 days. With the Jack Ma story, I think Biden should grant him asylum the first 100 days. I think that would be one of those kind of, you knocked out 28 of our guys. We're gonna let Jack. I'm not saying Jack would take it, obviously, but we're gonna let him have asylum here in the U.S. He can come and live here freely and move around. As I said before, you're kind of having that, Snowden in Russia criticizing the government, or having Ma here in the U.S. criticizing the CCP, especially with the Olympics coming up and all these New York Stock Exchange, all these issues. He's someone that could be on the cable news networks as much as he wanted, really pounding home his message if he really wants to do that. So I would submit that would be something that Biden could do. It's a big stick to the CCP. They would spin it. I'm not sure how, but it's kind of tit for tat almost with you're going to keep our people from coming to your country. We're going to let your people come to our country. So kind of a reversal message. What do you think about it? I know last time we talked about it, you're kind of on the fence. Have you moved on the Jack Ma getting asylum in the U.S.?
I think, this is a good title for this episode, is the first 100 days. What do we want to talk about regarding China and start to address? I mean, that's a pretty ballsy move. I mean, that would really tick off, I think, the CCP in a lot of ways. I'd be really curious to see if Jack Ma took us up on it. I mean, we have Joe Tsai here and many other Alibaba, executives and former executives living here in the United States of America. I'm curious if Jack Ma could do that. And I'm curious if there's extradition, sort of efforts that would prevent him from being able to get here. And then on top of it, I'm curious if even China has the ability to keep a guy worth, $50 billion from actually leaving the country when they don't want him to. It's the amount of resources that he has might be a pretty difficult combat for the CCP. Who knows, though? I mean, it's
let me clarify. So I'd handle it two ways. If I wanted to kind of embarrass China or put them on defense, I would come out publicly and say it. Hold a press conference, Secretary of State or whoever, and let them say it publicly. If I wanted to, and if he takes it, fine. If he doesn't, fine. You're just trying to make a political statement. If you really wanted to get over here, you'd back channel it, right? You would find out. So you could, for the U.S. government, we could figure a way to contact him, see if he wants it, arrange it, and then have him show up here and then announce that you've done it. I think that would be more of you're really serious about it. So there's two ways they can handle it. The result could be the same for both, but you could also reach out to him, and if he says no, then you don't ever say anything about it. You just let it go, and so so no harm, no foul, almost.
Yeah, it's well, no harm, no foul. It would definitely ruffle a lot of feathers. I mean, just
Handled it and you didn't talk about it publicly, I'm saying.
yeah, it would be a shot heard around the world without ever shooting anything and without really spending any money. It would just be the piece of paper and the copy that goes out through press release that would really create some serious disruption in the bilateral relationship. But I think it's an interesting idea and one that would really make a strong statement. We'll have to see how Biden proceeds on it. My guess is that's probably way down the pecking order on priorities with China engagement. So, but I think we've addressed some interesting ones though. First 100 days, COVID, educating the U.S. public on things, the SEC, and sort of how we engage with Chinese companies getting access to our U.S. capital markets. We talked about free speech, obviously the human rights issue. I think another one I'd bring up it's one of those that I think the Trump administration brought to light, but I don't think there was anything done about it other than I think there was one pharmaceutical manufacturing company outside of Washington, D.C. that did something in regards to repatriating a factory. But that is not your argument where, oh, can we bring back all our manufacturing, all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about something very specific, which is national security issued supply chains, right? Like things that actually really are important to our national security that involve supply chains that are in what is no longer 100% an allied nation, which is China. We need to start looking at what those are. And we saw a lot of them come to light during the COVID crisis and the ongoing COVID crisis. And we need to bring those back. We need to repatriate those back. There's a nice little side effect, which is middle-class jobs, skilled labor jobs, hopefully that kind of stuff, right? But let's talk about national security and getting those crucial supply chains back on our soil, or at least in allied soil.
Yeah, well, we got one more. I can't believe neither one of us thought about it. And this won't be the first 100 days. This will be the first 2 weeks, if I had to guess. Taiwan. He's going to have to give his position on Taiwan. And the CCP will almost, I would imagine, force his hand to respond to that. So either he can do it now, but within 2 to 3 weeks, we will hear something about, there it is. You're ahead of me as always. I'm sorry, I'm slow. But he's going to have to address Taiwan. That's probably the first month, right? You can't go much longer. Something about it.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of nuance to Taiwan. Number one is, are we going to keep the designation that was put through last month on Taiwan, or are we going to backtrack? I would hate to believe we can backtrack. I think it would look really bad if we did. So chances are that's going to remain in place. But then what do we do in regards to this pending potential land invasion, some sort of move on Taiwan to bring it back into the PRC fold? I think Biden is going to have to start working with the Pentagon, National Security Council, and various other advisors to try to rope in and understand where our allies are in that region of the world. Where does Australia stand on that? Where does Japan stand on that? Where does South Korea stand on that? Where do the ASEAN countries stand? Where does Philippines, quite frankly, stand on it? And whether they would back us if there is some move on Taiwan, because we need to know that now. Mm-hmm. To plan for what is probably to come. And when that does come, or is it a unilateral sort of, we're on our own type of engagement with China to try to protect Taiwan, or is it multilateral? And who are those allied nations that are going to help us in it? And how much are they going to help? Is it going to be military forces? Is it going to be sanctions? Is it going to be some sort of other use of soft power, or is it just yelling at China and saying, back off, we don't agree with it? I don't know, but it is going to be a major challenge for us. And we need to know what the playing field and the landscape is before we can even start to formulate what we're going to do as a nation.
Yeah, I think you're right. We had to figure out what the Biden administration is going to do in regards to the elevation of the diplomatic relations. Are they going to keep that? Because by keeping that, other nations will then have a chance to respond to us saying we're going to keep it or whatever we're going to do. And so that kind of gives them the natural ability to respond. Yes, we agree with the U.S. No, we don't. And that kind of answers some of the questions that you're getting to without actually having to have formal meetings and stuff. So I think that question will have to be answered here relatively soon because, the CCP. They're going to probably push forward. Also, Taiwan, they're going to be wanting to meet with the Biden administration. So will they take those meetings? How will they handle those phone calls? And so I think there's a lot of questions there that will be asked definitely in the first 100 days. So anything else, the first 100 days that you, as far as U.S.-China relations, you'd like to see the Biden administration do?
Yeah, and it sort of goes back to the free speech discussion we had earlier, but that's the national security law, which China passed, or the PRC passed, in order to really negate any public discourse over the 27-year early takeover of Hong Kong, and applies to all Hong Kong citizens, applies to all Chinese citizens, applies to technically any citizen of any nation around the world. And it doesn't apply to Chinese citizens who are just in China or in Hong Kong or any of the other special administration regions. It applies to them when they're on the road in any other nation too. We need to look at that law and understand how it impacts our freedom of speech rights here in the United States of America once again. And one of the reasons I'm bringing it up is because I witnessed it firsthand in lecturing at a particular university recently, where Chinese students who were both in the United States, watching that Zoom lecture, and also Chinese citizens overseas in China and in other nations, were super upset and very worried about some of the sensitive topics that we talked about in that particular class, a high level class, which, by the way, should be a class where various sensitive issues on any sort of topic can be talked in a safe space type of way. That is something that Princeton recently, and I posted it on Twitter last night, came out and said, hey, here are classes at Princeton that we recommend all Chinese nationals, Chinese citizens do not attend. Why? Because we will be talking about Tiananmen Square. We will be talking about human rights issues. We will be talking about imbalances in trade and Taiwan and Hong Kong and Tibet and various other things. That to me is ridiculous. Like, if you're here in the United States of America, you should feel protected to be able to have these discussions, talk about sensitive issues, and do it openly in a safe space. Like we've been talking earlier about free speech rights in a public forum for U.S. citizens to talk about things we don't agree with China. But here's one where we're just talking about students taking high-level courses at universities or colleges, the world of academia, where it's not public, it's private, and they're still nervous to do it, and there's still repercussions for doing it, especially if they're on Zoom, where who knows who's tracking what's actually being talked about.
Yeah, so I would agree in part, and here's what I would say. Uyghurs, and then the Hong Kong security laws or national security laws as they pertain to non-Chinese citizens. And so what I mean by that is they apply to me and you right now on the show, even though we're not Chinese citizens. I'm a full-blooded American, born here, lived here my whole life. They actually apply to us. So if we go to China, we could be arrested for things that we've said on this show or anywhere else in the world anytime. So from the American standpoint, I think that the launching point is start with China. You don't have the right to tell our citizens, American citizens, what they can say at any point ever. And again, that's a coalition. That's a coalition. I can't speak. Building argument. European Union. This applies to you guys as well. You can't let this happen. And so those are things. And not that I don't want the same thing for the Chinese nationals, but it's a little bit harder of an argument to make for them because they are their citizens. But you could take that and say you can't write laws that pertain to the whole world. It just doesn't work. We will say what we want in America whenever we want to, and you can't do anything about it. I'm sorry. That's how it works. And the real concern here is not, the CCP isn't going to knock on my door and take me and, fly back to China. That's not happening. But emerging markets where China has a lot more influence and leverage, there you could actually see them put the squeeze on dissidents in these countries because China may have more influence. Definitely has more influence there than they do in the U.S. So that's a very easy global uniting issue. We can put pressure on China, saying, no, you can't do this. Sorry, that's out of bounds. So I agree, and hopefully eventually you get to where you're wanting to go. I think that's the first step, though.
Yeah, and it spills into things that we've seen various leaders talk about with Hollywood and the fact that okay, yeah, we'll censor a particular film for display in China for Chinese nationals and Chinese citizens to watch there on their soil. But to be told, hey, you can't have that scene in the movie for the United States citizen to watch in the United States, that's ridiculous, and it all applies into the sort of the same principle of the Chinese Communist Party attempting to control narrative, not just within their borders, but throughout the world. And it's not just a censorship issue. It's also a proactive use of propaganda, as we also see with the Wolf Warrior diplomacy efforts and the way that they're trying to promote how the COVID virus came about, the fact that maybe it came from the military in the US and all this other kind of stuff, and how the US system of government is terrible and communism is great, and trying to win over Scandinavian countries to their side, or Australia trying to force them to believe certain things that the Global Times is espousing every day. We're seeing that constantly. So it's both a reactive censorship, a proactive propaganda effort. It all plays back right into what we've been talking about. And I think, quite frankly, over the course of 35 minutes, we've come up with a relatively good tee-up of what could be at least started to address in the first 100 days of the Biden administration.
And of course, we will be here to track it as we go through the first 100 days and through the Biden administration. Okay, Chris, any parting thoughts? Obviously, folks, be sure to check out the podcast if you missed any of the show. Spotify, iTunes, where we find good podcasts at. But anything else before we get out of here, Chris, that you wanted to follow up on?
No, you know what? The only thing I want to say is that regardless of political identity, regardless of what side of the right or left spectrum you are, let's all hope as a country that the winner of the presidential election, which was President Joe Biden, and his administration, can help carry through some of the good things that were happening in the previous 4 years, abate and nullify some of the bad things, and then also implement new directives, new proactive initiatives that help bring this country back to the prominence it should have and start being a world leader again in a way that we're super proud of and something that unites us as a country. That's what I'm putting out there. I'm putting out a lot of hope. I'm going to manifest that in the universe, and hopefully, it shines a light on a good 2021 moving forward.
Okay. And we will close with that. I'm sure we'll probably get in one more show at least before the week's out. And until then, folks, be safe out there, and we will talk to you next time.